Mission Possible, where we explore the frontiers beyond individual scale. I'm Braithwaite, a systems navigator, and I'm fascinated by the potential hiding within our systems. Unleashing that potential is the secret, I believe, to tackling our biggest challenges that are too vast for any solo hero to take on alone. Each week, I'm speaking with visionaries who've discovered that our greatest resource doesn't lie in individual brilliance, rather, it's the incredible capacity that exists between us all. Join us as we discover how to tap that potential by working beyond boundaries, beyond individual scale. This season, we're focused on the natural hazard sector, and living in New Zealand, it's a sector dear to my heart. After all, this is one of the most hazard-prone countries on the planet.
In today's episode, I'm delighted to be talking with Sam Ketley. He's currently Head of Innovation Commercial Risk Solutions at Aon for Asia Pacific. Sam and I now go back 10 years, where we first met working with a number of others in Wellington across the New Zealand challenge of insurance in the public sector, facing into a pretty shaky country that kept getting hit by rock and roll earthquakes. And what did that mean for insurance? It's an exciting episode. I hope you learn a lot about the interplay between insurance, the natural hazard sector, and you at home. So without further ado, here's my chat with Sam. Sam Ketley, welcome to the podcast. It's been way too long since we caught up, and I'm delighted to have you here today. Can't wait to spend the next 40 minutes having a chat about broadly the natural hazard sector. But as you so rightly said before we push the record button, what a broad topic. So let's see where this conversation goes, and let's have fun with it. Sam, could you give us a couple of words just about you just before we get started? It's always that awkward question, but just to introduce yourselves briefly to our listeners, that'd be awesome.
Thank you. So Sam Ketley, I guess the best description of me is I'm a souvenir now. Married a Kiwi girl, came to New Zealand, been here 12 years, but really my background, engineer, fell into insurance, became an underwriter, insurance broker. My current role is I lead innovation for Aon across Asia Pacific for our commercial risk solutions business. So kind of looking at problems we face and coming up with ideas and solutions and how to fix them in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Thanks, Sam. And Sam, you and I first crossed paths a few years ago now, when we were at an intersection with Earthquake Commission, I think it was, in New Zealand, and we were broadly across the sector looking at that interplay where the insurance, the private sector interplay with the public sector and then private citizens. And we had some really interesting conversations. We ran a few workshops and so forth, harnessing the collective brain power that we had around New Zealand and even more broadly than that. So if we sort of zero in on that kind of thinking and that interplay between the sectors, I wonder if you could, just to get us warmed up into it, thinking about, from your perspective, what practices or beliefs or ways of operating do you think are currently dominating that field of play as relates between insurance and natural hazard sector? What's out there at the moment? What's the big stuff that's really driving us around?
Yeah, so that was 2019 before COVID, and all that kicked off. I think we called them Risk and Resilience Solutions Forum, and it was looking at getting across the different silos between public and private sectors and how we could work together. And if you sort of boil that down into sort of what the thinking and practices dominate out there at the moment, I think a lot of the solution, I think the biggest issue has been we're still siloed. We've seen some improvements, but we're not coming together yet. There's a lot of duplication of effort. Thinking about it, there's some pockets. There's a lot of science and engineering. There's a lot of focus on the physical aspects, or a lot of focus on the hazards, not necessarily the risks, and certainly not enough around the mitigation piece. But the biggest thing is that because we're not working cohesively it's not quite working, which is where we were trying to come up with a solution 5 years ago. And there have been improvements. I'm not saying it's not there, but it's just we're not all the way there yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Maybe elaborate a little bit in from an insurance lens, particularly, any dominating kind of paradigms or ways of coming into this as it interfaces with the natural sector. So understanding the silos. Perhaps my curiosity is there anything that's happening that we can sort of look to that might keep those silos in place over time? I remember you talking to me about very interesting ideas for changing how we do insurance, particularly in other countries.
The insurance space, the biggest problem we've got is traditional insurance relies on sudden and unexpected. So you can't be aware of what's going to happen. You can't insure for a known. And the problem we've got with a lot of natural hazards, and natural hazards, it varies from, we're talking massive earthquakes or frequency flood issues, that whole scope. The insurance can cover what's sudden and unforeseen, but not what is going to be. If it's going to be a known flood every 2 or 3 years, they're not going to insure you for that. So the issue we've got in the insurance sector is how do we, something that is such a beneficial tool and solution for protecting wealth and built environment, how can we continue providing that in a situation where the risk is becoming such that for flood in particular, we're going to see insurance retreat. We're already starting to see it around the world. You're seeing if insurers aren't suitably resilient, they're going under. And that just really undermines the whole system. As soon as we don't have insurance, you struggle to access finance. And all it's just a real detriment to the economy. So we need to be looking at solutions around how do we mitigate that, before it's too late, before we've got an issue where we can't get insurance. But I guess the good news is that's traditional insurance. There are alternatives. An exciting space potentially is that because you can still get windstorm cover in places like the Caribbean through stuff called parametrics. So if we can get a parametric solution, that does provide an alternative source of capital, but they're not straightforward either. And then there's also an issue, and this is a common issue, where we can create a solution, but if there's no marketplace, if people don't see a burning platform, don't see the need, then the insurers won't provide it, and vice versa. Where there is a need, it's probably that the insurers won't provide it because it's not going to be profitable or sustainable for them either. So it's a very fine line that we're treading between the client, the insured, and the insurers and reinsurers.
Tim, can you tell us a bit more about parametrics? It's not a term that's commonly understood, I don't think.
Yeah, so in simple terms, indemnity insurance is cover. It's very broad. There's you enter into a contract. There's a wording. There's basically insurance clause that says if the event happens as per the clause, the policy activates, and then you go through a whole long-winded claims process. Generally, the insurer is saying, well, we'll indemnify you. We'll put you back in the position you were at the time just before the loss. And that claims process just takes time because you have to demonstrate that you're reinstating your assets. So it works. It can sometimes be very quick. Quite often it's quite long and complex. And so that's a traditional insurance product. Parametrics work on the principle that it's a parameter. It's not a broad sort of coverage. It's a very specific, and it's the trigger, the mechanism is the parameter. So it could be wind speed at a location. It could be a level of earthquake shaking at a location. So it's very risk focused, very solution orientated around a specific peril at a specific location. Insurers like them. Lots of capital markets like them because they are quite black and white. If the trigger's met, they pay. Some clients love them because they're so quick. There's no real test of damage, and if you've insured for a set amount, the event happens, trigger, it pays usually within sort of 30 days. And we've seen them working. Morocco, recently the hurricanes that went through Florida, there were parametrics in Florida. These have worked. The issue is they're quite new, so they have been quite expensive. Pricing is coming down as more people use them. But the other issue as well is obviously if you get the wrong trigger, you choose the wrong parameter, or you suffer damage but the parameter's not being hit, it's not worked. So they're really good, but there needs to be a lot more thought at the front end around what to do and what the parameters you're choosing and the makeup of the solution to make sure it works. Yeah. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, I'm sure it will. Let's have a think about, so that's something quite innovative. It's getting tested. A number of years ago that product wouldn't have existed. And you've talked about the market searching for a product and a product being made available that suits insurers, but then the market's got to even know about it. So again, that fine balance and that fine interplay. You talked about earlier starting to see the potential for insurance retreat, and I just wonder if there are any practices and approaches in addition to parametrics that are starting to be discussed at a more macro level that will help shift the field, maybe that interplay, that intersect. I recall us talking about the great need for the underwriting of insurance for our infrastructure, for our country, to get investment, so forth, so we can do offshore investment for infrastructure projects. So it's a very complex interplay of actors and different players in the system. Have you seen anything shifting in the past, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, that tells us the trajectory is moving and we are not sitting on our laurels of traditional insurance or the interplays? What's happening in the field that you look to that's positive around how this is shifting?
We're seeing slow, gradual progression, but we aren't there yet. So the issue you've got is in these areas where insurance retreat is likely. Yes, there is potentially an alternative, but the issue is potentially we've got so much at risk in areas that are not currently exposed but will be, that there is simply not going to be enough capital to go around. And I think we need to start thinking it is a systemic issue. So insurance is not the solution. Land use planning it's everything has to come together. So we need to stop building in areas which are not great. We need to enable solutions which allow people to be relocated out of exposed areas. Otherwise, we need to start looking at how do we physically mitigate, bigger defenses for areas which are very high value that we can't move. And then we look at the sort of combined solutions between sort of risk financing and risk transfer. And it's all going to be a combination, but it's really going to take people to come together. And in a way, we kind of saw that in New Zealand. It's unfortunate. I hope we don't need a catalyst event. But if you look at what happened with Christchurch and the innovation that came out of following the Christchurch earthquake, it almost takes that type of event, unfortunately, to sort of drive the impetus to go there. But I think there are enough events going on around the world. You're seeing all the sort of weather bombs and atmospheric rivers and big storms, bigger hurricanes, more violent hurricanes, cyclones. I think there's more of that potential for a catalyst, but we haven't yet got a sufficient tipping point to move from theoretical to practice. So we've got the right ingredients. We're just not there yet with the right sort of recipe, shall I say?
Thanks, Sam. Are there any, thinking of those catalytic events that are happening kind of on a more regular timeline going on around the world at the moment, are there any that have happened in the last few years that you look to and say, yes, there was some innovation came out of that. That was a good example of people coming together, moving towards solutions collectively, even if it wasn't perfect? There are things that we could look to there that we can learn from and go, let's take a bit of that and see what we can do with it.
I'm trying to help create those solutions. We're trying to actually bring the actors together. So this is about getting physical mitigation providers with financial. So I see myself in the world of financial risk mitigation as insurance and risk transfer solutions, working in hand with entities and companies that create physical mitigation. So your engineering consultancies, your asset managers. But then you've got to align the stars with the asset owners or ultimately the insured, and be that government, be it private sector. And then you've got to think through, is the legal framework, is that going to allow people to still maneuver? Is it quite constrained? There's a whole litany of issues. And I think at the moment, like that's what I say, the problem's very complex. The solution's going to be complex. And I've not seen it, and I'm looking forward to seeing whoever does it first, but I've not quite seen everything fall into place. So there will definitely be solutions out there that I'm not aware of, where people have sort of come together. And you do see some great ideas coming out of the US and other places where that, you know, at a very local sort of, not a micro level, but not a macro level, somewhere in between, localized solutions coming together. But it's still not, for the problems we're facing, it's still not sufficient.
At a natural hazards conference in Australia earlier in the year, and it seemed to me there was quite a push for more action at the local level to take care of mitigation and self-reliance and resilience. And very much the message was it can't be one or the other. It can't just be macro and it can't just be micro.
That's right.
And there was a whole lot of discussion around different thinking that was going on, and even different technologies, methodologies, inspiration from other sectors that people were picking up. And that's just interested in your reflections on that micro resilience. And it was very much in the mitigation and I'll say self-reliance, because resilience is such a loaded term these days. Communities becoming self-reliant and less dependent on, we would say here in New Zealand, the Crown, but in other countries, the federal or the state, to kind of be that insurer of last resort, as we often hear that coming. What are your thoughts and reflections on that? And again, things that you're seeing out in your orbit that might be useful to have a think about.
Again, you see pockets of that. We had a good example with Queenstown Lakes District Council doing a lot of work, taking, and actually this sort of, you scroll back a little bit, one of the biggest things that's improving is the amount of information and data that's becoming available. So if we can understand a problem better, quantify it better, or just have better information around it, be it, you know, satellite pictures or whatever, so we can actually understand what the problems are, you can then come up with a better strategy around how to mitigate it. There is definitely that micro piece. So for Queenstown Lakes, it's been a lot of investment in their asset management and better assets, redundancy, building stuff that's going to be more resilient in the future. So that's really good to see, because their attitude was that if there was a big alpine fault type event, the West Coast gets destroyed, really badly affected, and all these issues going on. Queenstown is not going to be the focus of attention, because there's going to be thousands of other people affected. So we're going to have to be sort of on our own. And I think that was a good attitude that they took. They decided that, you know what, we're going to own our own problem and do what we can to be in the best position. And I do think that's a really good mindset for all of us to be aware of. What can I do? So putting, you know, solar panels on your own house is a great way of having a little bit of self-reliance, in the way of if power goes down, if you've got batteries and solar panels, then you know, you've got a little bit more independence as such. So, you know, all these different levels. Then but there's always this interplay, and it's a legacy issue. We didn't know what we didn't know in 1980, and allowing people to build in places, and even before that. And then people get attached to things and they don't want to move. And it's like, how do we get people to accept there is a risk, and they're now an exposure to the rest of us, and we really need them to rethink how they're operating. But that's very emotive. So it's this whole combination of all these different factors, and then also the personal aspect and people to people aspect. So it's complex.
It is, absolutely. Is there anything, Sam, you're seeing out there that excites you around where we might go? So understanding the complexities, understanding the system is totally interconnected, but also when we always look at a system problem, there's always little fires of hope, and they help elevate the whole system overall, right? So we know we can never sit down and redesign a whole system. It just sort of moves at the pace it moves. Other areas that might be useful, you know, obviously AI, everyone's talking about at the moment, but there's also lots of advances in things like neuroscience, behavioral economics, things like placemaking, fields of specialism and so forth. I wonder if you're seeing anything, and I just, what's getting you excited when it all looks too hard and it all looks a bit difficult because people are, you know, in their silos, and we're all tired, and it's nearly Christmas, and, you know, and it feels a bit hard work, frankly. What do you look and go, sure. Yeah, it's hard, but I still get up in the morning because this is happening, and I can see some potential there, even if it's just a pocket, even if it might be a glimmer of hope at government level or local government or your neighbourhood. What are you seeing out there that you go, that could be something?
It definitely feels like there are things coming together. So there was a recent meeting in Wellington between the Natural Hazards Commission and a whole bunch of insurers and brokers and loss adjusters about how do we operate more effectively as a community if another big event happens, which was really positive. That's a good example of coming together and starting to think outside of the box. And there's some good innovation. That was an example of the Swiss coming together to come up with a solution, because Switzerland's really exposed to earthquakes. You may or may not know that they are. But it's a good example of looking outside of New Zealand and saying, could we bring that home here? I think the interesting thing is that I'm excited about, there is a huge amount more data coming through. There's a lot more in the way of sort of sensors, how we interpret data to turn it into information so we can make better decisions. The issue, my frustration is there's so much good stuff. My issue is the biggest opportunity actually is the conversion of good research into actual commercial application. Actually, that's one of the things I would argue, that a lot of little steps that we could take today are there available. It's just that we're either not recognizing them or the right people are not spotting them. So you need to get to that certain level where you get to decision makers who go, oh yeah, that's a really good solution. And I think it's happening, and I think you are starting to see that come together as like-minded people start moving together, and sort of it's groundswell. But there is definitely a leadership component here, which comes from, say, the political side, and making sure that we've got consistency there. We've got a 3-year election cycle, so great decision makings. We can't just have it keep flip-flopping every 3 years, and we don't go anywhere because we've just undone what we've just done. So there needs to be sort of like that, and that was one of the things we were trying to do with that forum, is actually make it totally apolitical. This is for not just for us; it was for future generations, and that's the other hope I get as well, is seeing my daughters and young people today getting a much more, I think they see it as a much more of a real challenge. And I guess that our job is to sort of pass the baton over at some point and say, right, we've done our best, hopefully not to stuff it up too much, and it's over to you to carry it on and make it better. But in the meantime, try and come up with the solutions that hopefully are a bit of a roadmap to say, this is how we can see things coming together, and maybe the right people, it will all align at some point. That's a hope, I guess.
That's a hope. Sam, you talked a bit about data, and you talked about a couple, maybe there's some steps that we could take. They're actually available now. If only we could see them, recognize them, value them, and take them. If I gave you a magic wand to wave, and Sam Ketley became the all-powerful, all-knowing being, and you could wave your magic wand and go, this one, and this one, to 3 of those steps, what would you pick?
Wow, I would never give me that level of power, by the way.
Unfortunately, I don't have a magic wand that works.
I think that willingness to collaborate is really important. So I'd like to see, and that comes into friction, but there's all sort of attitudes and then there's a competitive aspect. We all are working in the private sector. We're in business. We're here. We've got a role to follow, and a job to do, and a company to work for. And I'd like it if more. I think the company has a great attitude towards these issues and understanding equity, and we're in the business of better decisions. So I can really see that, but it's also that collaboration and partnership between ourselves and maybe our direct competitors might be quite hard, but there are organizations that we could align with in order to come up with solutions. I think we've got to be careful of saying there's no one person with the right solution. I think every single solution is going to be bespoke and fit the right time. And we may have it, somebody else may have it. But I do think that there needs to be greater collaboration of getting like-minded people together. So that would be sort of one of the things I'd like to see more of, is for coming together and working together. The other thing is I think you alluded to it before, the investment. I think the thing I'd like to see is more time and energy spent up front on understanding the problems we're facing. Because if we can understand the problem better, you can create that better solution. I heard recently that you've got to love your solution, but you've got to love the problem more. And it's not that the problem is the be all and end all. It's the fact that you know, if you understand the problem well enough, you can adapt what you're doing. As a problem changes, solution changes. And it's that whole, this is not fixed. There's not going to be you've done it. That's it. You know, put it away. This is a journey we're on. So I think it's really a matter of, we need to spend more time understanding what's going on around us with the right people in the room to understand, okay, this is the best way forward. But then obviously you run the risk of having 50 people in a room and everyone's talking and nothing gets done. So that's a real fine line to tread as well. But yeah, I think people investing more in not just the science and the research, it's more the application of the science and the research in the real world. How does that actually get applied? How does it work commercially? Because we've got to influence decision makers, be that shareholders, be it business owners, be it homeowners. And that's where, again, some of those other tools come in. And it's either going to, unfortunately, be a stick or a carrot sometimes with the insurance. If insurance is no longer available, that's a stick. But maybe we can entice people to move with a carrot before that happens. I don't know. That's just a thought.
Thanks, Sam.
Has that helped?
Well, absolutely. You talked about bringing that practical application in, and we know how hard it is to convene people. Are there any pockets where you can say or see opportunities for that real practical translation of science into practical use? Do you see examples of that working? Again, if it's in pockets, and what might we do to shift that forward? I know this has been a perennial problem, you know, not just in this sector, but I go to health, for example, when I worked in the UK. The timeline between a discovery in health and you and I getting the benefit of it was 17 years in the making. So if we could close, I said to them, if we could close that gap to even 10, wouldn't that be awesome? I wonder what could be done to practically bring those timelines down. And I remember talking to colleagues in the hazard science area about the time we were doing the work and asking them that same question. And it's got to be a partnership approach, I think.
We've got at the moment, we've got people who are from the research community who work within Aon. So that's their thinking and mindset, which is really helpful. I've made a concerted effort to be more involved in understanding what research is out there, what is being created. Actually, after this call, I'm speaking to a professor from Auckland Uni about something. So, you know, again, it's about that organizational piece of just spending the time. I think that's the biggest consideration for me, is just giving it the time. So understanding what's going on and seeing what's going on, but it's a two-way street. There's a lot of research which is fantastic, and it's, you know, getting money for grants for research, and it's giving, you know, PhD students and master's students something to do, but it's not actually relevant to the real world. So I think it's a two-way street. There's a bit of a disconnect between practical research and its application and how it would be used, and the theoretical deep dive into something which may or may not add real value. So there's a fine line again to be trod in that space. But I do think it just takes more people having that mindset and openness to go, yeah, what's already been done. And I think that's one of the areas where AI, I think, will be really helpful, because I think there's the AI opportunity is actually going through and saying, what are all the research papers on this particular topic? And then highlighting and going, oh, hold on, this is the litany of, because that's the biggest problem at the moment. We don't know what we don't know. And elsewhere in the world, I'm sure they've got some great ideas and great students working on solutions, and nobody's aware of it. But that's potentially where AI, I think, can be a huge time saver and help, is actually sort of highlighting all this good research and how it could be brought to bear. So that's an opportunity. But I think part of it is people need to be more active in actually building those bridges between the silos.
Sam, I love that. The idea that popped into my head was we use AI to help us slow down, because the AI can go faster to pull stuff together in one sense, but that can create the space for us to slow down and take the time and consider things without that. So I think that's an interesting paradox, that we can have AI processing faster and bringing material together such that we can then sit with it and consider it and then take it forward.
Yeah. And again, it's every single problem that we're facing. There's a level of commonality between all the problems, but after a while it becomes very bespoke. The issue is very specific, and what works over here may not work over there. So so I think if that's that common understanding, but yeah, there's lots and lots of research in this space. I just don't think anyone's got a view of the ecosystem of what's actually being done and what's being, and even within, I was at the Lifelines conference earlier this year, and the number of times there was a very similar topic being talked about, and it was somebody coming up and it was like, well, that's very similar to that. Which one's better? And we now is that 4 or 5 different organizations doing roughly the same thing. And it just seems that duplication of effort. It seemed like we could probably do this better somehow. But yeah, so that was just a thought.
And that's an interesting one. Sam, us at home, you're donkey deep in this, in the insurance world, the data, the patterns that you see emerging. You talked a bit there about the Lakes District approach taken at a local government level. What's the awareness that we as individual citizens, how can we educate ourselves? What is it you would love to see individuals doing to help us raise the whole system up, even in small, tiny ways? What 2 or 3 things might we choose to do as individuals to improve things in the system? Because we're not all the big decision makers, but every individual decision adds up, which you know from insurance, right?
It does. I think it's taking the time to understand the issues if you can, but even we see it all the time with decision making. People, the Auckland anniversary floods, where all those houses which were built right on the cliff tops, and there was cliff top collapse and landslips. Yeah, they could build there, but why? You knew that there was a risk of doing that. Why build there? Some people have, I'm assuming, I don't know if it's true or not, but some of their properties are still red stickered, or they I don't know what their solution is about them getting into their house if they've been able to resolve that. But I think we need to have people being aware, and it's been good. There've been colleagues recently who've come to me and said, well, I'm looking at this house. Would you recommend? This is the information on the limb, and there's a potential for flood risk. What do you think about it? And that's good. That's a positive. They're actually asking questions and wanting to be informed. And I think that's a big thing. I think it's, as we're starting to see it happening more and more, people are going to hopefully be more selective on where they buy to live and all the rest of it. And the insurance market will also drive that. Like I say, that sort of stick or carrot is going to come into play. But I do think that that's a good way of people making a personal choice. I'm not going to go and buy a house on the edge of a cliff in an earthquake-prone area. I'm not going to buy a house right next to the ocean, right? Beautiful view, but very low down, where it's likely that coastal inundation is going to affect me at some point in the future. I'm not going to live on a flow path for a river, or very close to a flood-prone area. You can't. Again, there's some things where the insurance is going to be great because you can't see everything, and that's what it's there for. But I think if people can start making wiser choices on some big ticket issues like where they live, that would be useful. And then obviously, I'm very much of the mindset of mitigation. I understand that we need to make personal decisions about being green and what we buy and all the rest of it. But unfortunately, I do see sort of on a macro level, at a global level, there's some fairly big sort of climate change deniers out there. So I don't think we're going to be in a position to change the world from an environmental point of view. So I think we need to focus on the mitigation, personally, more of personal decisions around what we build and where, what houses we buy. And then the other thing as well is just being a little bit more prepared. Living in the UK, never thought about an emergency bag. Being here, actually just having one on standby ready to go. You don't ever think you're going to need it, but that's the attitude everyone has until it happens. So yeah, just little personal decisions on that, just being aware. And I do like the adverts recently I've seen on, it was at TVNZ, sort of having a plan for the, I think it was done by the Natural Hazards Commission. That's great. I think people do need to be aware. These things happen in New Zealand. So yeah, having a plan. Yeah.
Thanks, Sam. Well, we've covered quite a range of territory, and I know within that, and I know from conversations we've had, that you've got some big ideas of what might be possible. I'd love to know of what might be your moonshot idea that seems completely impossible now, But let's imagine it happened and how transformative it would be. What would that thing be, Sam? You're going to get the right people around you. You're going to have some interested parties. It won't necessarily be easy. It won't go the way you think. But what would be that one thing that right now seems ridiculous? And it was data's law states any idea of the future should at first seem ridiculous. And I love Jim Data's quote, University of Hawaii. So what's your moonshot, slightly ridiculous idea, might get you laughed out of the boardroom, but let's see what it might look like and how transformative would that be if we can make it happen. What would it be for you, Sam?
I know I lead innovation, but I'm not going to think outside of the box too far. I'm much more into, I'm an engineer by background, so incremental is my kind of what's achievable. But this is still a stretch. So this is something that I've been working on for several years. I haven't achieved it yet, but it is that interface between a financial mitigation strategy and a physical mitigation strategy is a sort of like a hybrid solution, so that the client, and we're starting to see it. We've been working closely with Wellington City Council this year. I know it was in the news, so we can kind of talk about it at the local news that it was within the Wellington region. But there was a really big focus on understanding the problem, quantifying the loss. How big is the issue that we're facing? And now we're into that sort of financial mitigation. What can we do? And there's a next stage, which is going to be, okay, now that's sort of translating into that physical adaptation piece, but not disconnecting the financial view. So is it possible that we could actually have a complete hybrid solution where, and you see it all the time, where people will do a fantastic piece of work of making that property more resilient, but it's not fully captured or given value of by the insurance sector. So how do we actually sync those two together so that, and a sort of the aspirational aspect would be, could we do that at a macro level on a regional basis, so that you've got systemic solutions for communities, systemic solutions for industries. So, farming, agriculture in that area, or viticulture in another area. Yeah, so that sort of the moonshot idea would be, how can we bring those two parts together and aligned with what would have to be central government or federal government, the local government, public and private sectors, and using all the tools out of the toolbox and understanding what our strengths are and what we bring to the table, but working together collaboratively to create the solution. So that sounds like it's not crazy. It's not moonshot per se, but we're not there yet. But I can see it, but how we get there is the hard part.
And the transformation you'd expect to see out of that, Sam?
So for a start, you'd have communities with, you've said it, resilient is quite a loaded word, but communities would be more resilient. Insurance would be more sustainable. It would probably find that we'd end up with a lot more green spaces in cities. We'd allow nature to do its thing more. I think we can't undo what's happened in the past. We've got to live with what our generation and previous generations have done, and the transformation is climate change. So now we've got to adapt to that new environment. So the utopia, or the aspiration of what that would be we can live with the environment that we've created in a way which is not going to destroy that environment anymore, but is sustainable both physically and financially. It's not going to ruin a country to try and rebuild itself. And there's some big macro issues, finite amount of capacity, finite amount of resources. So we've got to be strategic about what we do and where and when. But yeah, but again, if you understand the problem, then you can go down a path of prioritizing what needs to be done first.
Sam, thank you so much. Fantastic moonshot idea. I think it's a lovely mission possible to explore even further. Just wanted to thank you so much for your time and being with us today. I know it's a really busy week for you, so I can't say thank you enough for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Always good to chat. Always loved hanging out with you.
I hope you enjoyed the chat with Sam as much as I did, and that leads us perfectly into our segment, Old Ways, New Ways. Sam's moonshot idea was that we look at things systemically and we integrate across all these different parts of the system to come up with sustainable systemic solutions to really, really complex problems. Where have we seen this before? Well, we can look right back to the Mayan communities in Mesoamerica. So this dates roughly 2000 BCE to arguably around 1500 CE. And what a lot they got done in that period, the Mayans. They were decentralized city-states that shared knowledge and technology and culture over those many millennia. And this, I think, is what Sam was talking about. How do we share our knowledge? How do we look at the whole system and work across all of that to come up with solutions that work for everyone? It's a deeply complex space, as we've seen from Sam, and the interplay of both commercial and political risk with you and I every day in our homes and the cities that we live in. The Mayan civilization was a highly decentralized network of city-states. Each functioned independently but contributed to collective growth and prosperity of the wider culture, and I think that's what we're talking about here. Despite an absence of that unifying central government, the Maya's collaborative nature allowed them to achieve remarkable advancements in various fields which were shared across the region and over many centuries. And these things were of importance to all involved. And as we'll see from Sam's conversation, he highlights some of those areas for us that we all need to be concerned about. So where did the Mayan nail some of these things? Well, scientific and astronomical achievements are quite famous. They invented various versions of the calendar that were later superseded in the West, but held on for centuries. The Hub calendar was 365 days, for example, and we stick to that today. They were great at ecliptic and Venus tracking. They tracked the movements of Venus because it was really important to their rituals. Pyramid designs were made such that they could observe the rising and the setting of Venus. And in my country here in New Zealand, of course, one of Captain Cook's great missions when he was exploring and mapped our country was to plot the track of Venus. So this thing continues to be important across the millennia. These scientific achievements weren't isolated to a single region. They were passed from one Maya city to another through networks of trade and travellers and priests who moved freely across this vast region. We shouldn't overlook either that they were also alliances were formed and broke down, conflicts came and went. But even in those troubled times, much like we are experiencing in many parts of the world today, the knowledge and the technology and the thinking still passed along and ultimately helped to restabilise areas and to lift the whole evolution of the countries. The thing I wanted to focus on most, though, was agricultural innovations, because these really looked at the entire system and were really for the greater good of sustaining increasingly large populations. They developed, the Mayans, advanced agricultural practices that were tailored to diverse environments of the region. So there was no one-size-fits-all, and it's something that we need to think about when we look at a system. They had rainforest to coastal areas, wet to dry, and their ability to create and pass on ideas about sustainable farming methods was critically important for sustaining their large populations. These concepts and way of operating, I believe, is something that we should be considering when we take on Sam's Moonshot challenge of looking at an entire system in our thinking. Finally, just to point out that the Mayans were also pretty cool at architecture and engineering. Their construction techniques were incredible. They created massive stone structures, and many cities included plazas, pyramids and observatories to challenge those that we commonly know in Egypt. And all of this without centralised and unified state control that many ancient civilisations, Egypt included, had. They were made possible because each Maya city, while independent, was part of a broader network of cultural exchange. The knowledge was passed through, as I've mentioned, trade and rituals and the movement of people. So what couldn't we do together if we started looking at things from a systems perspective, particularly when we're thinking about the interplay of insurance with the natural hazard sector and the possible place that AI, different types of insurance, can play in the world of tomorrow? I've enjoyed speaking with Sam. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast. We look forward to seeing you next time here on Mission Possible. I'm Anne Braithwaite. We'll see you next time.